Greetings and welcome to In-Depth. I'm Dike Rostant. I think it's going to be a good one because we're starting off with a question. Whose job is it to fight human trafficking and the conditions that allow it to thrive? Now we'll have this conversation, which includes the role of civil society organizations, with Deputy Director of the Counter Trafficking Unit, Kimoy Thomas-Williams, and Advocacy and Movement Building Country Manager for Free the Slaves, Adrian Alexander. And we're saying welcome to you both. I want to start with you, please, Mr. Alexander. Give us a definition. Let's start from definitions. What is modern slavery?
Thanks so much for having us, DK, and good day to your audience. Modern slavery is an umbrella term. It's not one that is legally defined, such as trafficking in persons. So it's an umbrella term that is often taken to incorporate a multiplicity of issues, such as trafficking in persons, also called human trafficking, forced labor, child labor, and things of that nature. So being indebted, bondage, and so forth. Modern slavery encapsulates all of those terminologies.
Thank you so much. And Ms. Thomas-Williams, let's bring you into the conversation, please, asking for an overview of the Counter Trafficking Unit, because sometimes we know something may be there and we kind of have an idea what they're supposed to be doing, we think, but give us an overview of what the CTU is there for. Thanks.
Okay, great. So the Counter Trafficking Unit is a specialized unit that falls under the Ministry of National Security, and we treat solely with human trafficking situations. The unit is a hybrid unit, so we are made up with specially trained police officers. They are the ones responsible for conducting investigations into human trafficking. And then we have civilian staff as well, and we are more focused on providing care and attention to victims of trafficking. So, for example, if someone thinks they've seen something that can amount to human trafficking, they would call city of police stations. We have civil society, sometimes even the hospitals would call us. And based on the phone call, the police officers will then start an investigation into the matter, be it through surveillance or interviewing the relevant persons.
And with that, I want to ask Mr. Alexander, sometimes, and I really like the fact that you talk about it being a hybrid entity, Ms. Thomas-Williams. And Mr. Alexander, that begs the question, what are some of the ways that civilians and specifically civil societies can work with established units like this to combat some of these issues?
Thanks for that question, DK. And really, we have to begin with the question that you asked earlier, whose responsibility is it? So while government has a mandate under various international conventions, such as the Transnational Organized Crime Convention and the optional protocol, which addresses trafficking in persons, government isn't only responsible. So civil society, individuals, media, business, unions, everyone has a stake in ensuring that people are safe here in Trinidad and Tobago, and that we play a role in suppressing crime. So for civil society organizations, under what is usually termed the 4 Ps of prevention, protection, prosecution, and partnership, they play an integral role in terms of partnering with state agencies and also play a significant role in prevention because they're on the ground, they can get the word out. They're more trusted in many societies than the state, and therefore they can help to build capacity in people to make certain changes. So for example, when we think about some of the key vulnerabilities that lead to slavery, things like lack of awareness of rights, civil society can step in and supplement the work being done by the state in teaching and educating people about their rights so they know when they're being taken advantage of or not. Also in terms of what the risks are from taking certain steps or answering certain ads, civil society is there on the ground and can utilize those opportunities where they engage with the community to provide that type of education and information. But it goes beyond awareness. We're also talking about action and actual change. And civil society has for so many decades been a catalyst for change in society. So if there are weak organizations in a community, for instance, civil society can actually be formed to organize the community. So a civil society organization can actually be there as a buffer and protector against those who are perpetuating enslavement. dealing with things such as household insecurity, which is another key area of vulnerability, or inadequate legal protections. Attorneys can form small groups where they go in and provide legal aid at no cost to people in communities, and also survivors. So where someone has already been a victim of trafficking, they're especially vulnerable to being re-trafficked. And that's where civil society can also come in and provide physical, psychological, and other support services to them. So it's a very broad base in which civil society can get involved. I know Kimoy can probably share with us the current National Plan of Action and where there is space within that NPA for the involvement of civil society.
And I really like that point you made, and thank you for that. But I really like the point you make that civil societies, individuals, groupings who are on the ground, and people have that faith and that trust in you that they'll be able to get these services. You're able to build capacity with them and able to do it in a manner that doesn't necessarily expose them. And with that, and I see you nodding, and I want you to get to that, please, Ms. Thomas-Williams. How does the CTU, even outside of the national plan, how does the CTU help CSOs build capacity? And I'll even ask some of the challenges to that work. Thanks.
Okay, so the CTU, we have had a very long working relationship with civil society as well as the faith-based organizations. And what we do is we sensitize their employees so that they know when they're engaging with persons if there are any signs to human trafficking. Because as Adrian would have rightfully said, they are on the ground and they have a lot of interaction with members of vulnerable communities who, by extension, are vulnerable to become victims of trafficking as well. So based on the sessions we do with them, they are able to identify persons who are showing signs of human trafficking and refer those persons to us. Apart from that, we also use the civil society as a conduit. So when we want to reach out to the migrant community in particular, we work with civil society so as to educate them on how they can protect themselves from becoming victims of trafficking. So we show them the red flags. What are the indicators? What are some of the tactics that would-be traffickers would use? So that is how we partner right now with CSOs as well as the faith-based organizations. And as I would have said before, victims need a lot of care. They need a lot of attention, just like how we need food, we need clothing. Similarly, the victims need that too, and even much more than we do. So the civil society and faith-based organizations also assist us with that as well. So they have food drives, they have clothing drives. So they are really the support mechanism for victims. They are also very helpful as far as counseling is concerned, because most of our victims would have experienced a lot of traumatic situations and they require counseling. So here, civil society steps in as well. And in the case of the faith-based organizations, they help with the development of the spirituality of victims, because there are some victims who want to go to church or they want to work on their spiritual life. And that is where the faith-based organizations step in as well.
And we continue this conversation. When we return, we are looking at the ways that CSOs can be empowered to fight against human trafficking. We're doing so with Adrian Alexander and Kimoy Thomas-Williams, the Deputy Director of the Counter Trafficking Unit and Advocacy and Movement Building Country Manager for Free the Slaves. Stay with us. We return with more. Welcome back. We are looking at the role of CSOs in combating human trafficking. We're doing so with the Advocacy and Movement Building Country Manager for Free the Slaves, Adrian Alexander, as well as the Deputy Director of the Counter Trafficking Unit, Ms. Kimoy Thomas-Williams. And Mr. Alexander, it seems as though earlier this year there have been some initiatives that you all have done in a kind of systematic manner. So one of them would have been a Caribbean Forum for Stakeholders. Give us a little idea about that, please, in terms of like, what are some of the things that you went in with? What are some of the things that you took out of that forum?
Certainly, Dike. But earlier this year, Free the Slaves really initiated its intervention into the Southern Caribbean. For the past 14, 15 years, we've been working in different communities in Haiti and the Dominican Republic. So This was our very first regional forum. Just give you a little backdrop. This is the 10th anniversary of our Freedom from Slavery forums. So this year we decided to come to the Caribbean. It's something that we've been asking for the past 3 years or so. And it meant bringing stakeholders in the anti-slavery movement from various CARICOM territories here to Trinidad and Tobago in February to really look at some of the areas in which we can improve upon the prevention work that needs to be done to actually reduce or eliminate altogether the trafficking in persons that take place in our region, learning from one another. We had people from Guyana, from Jamaica, from St. Lucia, from Barbados, and Belize, as far as Belize, and those coming in from the US to share international perspectives, as well as some of our colleagues from Africa who were sharing some of the things that they're doing there to prevent trafficking in persons. Another area, of course, was protection, as Kimoy mentioned. Victims and survivors of trafficking need a lot of support and care. So we were looking at how can we improve upon the care that we provide, but also how can we build a regional type of trust for protection across the CARICOM region. In addition to that, we looked at a very thorny issue of prosecution. How can we improve upon not only the prosecutions, but also investigations? So if you have better investigations and evidence collection, we can have, of course, better success in terms of prosecutions. So we looked at those three areas over a 3-day period. And coming out of that, we were able to compile a report. One thing that was very, very helpful, I think, for some of the law enforcement officers who were present was the speech by former Ambassador John Richmond. He, as some of your viewers and listeners may know, is a former ambassador to combat human trafficking out of the US. And he gave us like what he called his top 10 hits of top 10 strategies to improve prosecutions and successful prosecutions of that for trafficking in persons cases. So I think that was one of the big takeaways. We had some judges, magistrates, police officers, and so on there who indicated that not only hearing from the international practitioners, but also being given an opportunity through case studies and workshops and role play to apply what they had learned over the 3 days to really build confidence in themselves, as well as to take back to their respective organizations.
And we want to get to the legislative aspect of it momentarily with Ms. Thomas-Williams. But before that, though, there's something that you said in the first half, and I want you to expand on that briefly. Thank you, Ms. Alexander. Someone who has been trafficked, it's almost as though the probability of them being trafficked again is a little higher. Take me through the exact terminology and explain it for me, thanks.
So an individual who may have had pre-existing vulnerabilities prior to their being trafficked will now often have increased vulnerabilities. So, for instance, if someone is trafficked and during that trafficking experience, they may have been forced to incur debt. They may have been forced to commit criminal acts. And therefore, if proper investigations aren't done, that person may actually be prosecuted and convicted of certain types of offenses that they were forced to commit by the trafficker. So there are layers upon layers of additional trauma and vulnerability and disadvantages that may have been placed upon this individual as a result of the trafficking experience. So now that they've been liberated, whether by themselves, as the UNODC report has indicated, 41% of victims actually liberate themselves, or through some other interventions, the fact remains that they are more vulnerable now than when they began, which means that they may be more tempted to accept certain types of offers. They may be a little more tempted to feel as though that because they have a criminal record, they don't have much of a choice. So the increased vulnerability is what really leads to this likelihood that they may be more susceptible to being trafficked than someone who's trafficked for the very first time. I don't know if Kimoy also wants to add.
Please, Ms. Thomas-Williams.
Right. Yes. So I am in agreement with what Adrian is saying. And then we also have to consider the flip side, where there are times as well where some victims would later on become traffickers as well. So that is why to tie it in our session today, civil society is so very important to keep being supportive to these victims, because sometimes what happens is that when they get the assistance that they need, they still feel as if they can do better on their own. And as a result of that, they then would start recruiting girls. It has been proven in the past in other countries and also in Trinidad, where because they know the system now, they in turn start recruiting girls so that they become independent and they are making the money on their own terms. So that is the flip side. So civil society needs to be there to step in to prevent them from being re-victimized or from becoming traffickers.
And in terms of sensitizing, because that's a big part of what you do, what is the thing that you find you need to kind of bring in terms of information, or what is the biggest gap with regard to that sensitization process as you deal with CSOs, as you deal with groupings, as you deal with individuals?
Right. So for sensitization, I think we have the prevention and the protection down packed. However, I would like us to reach out more to the potential buyers of sex in the case of sex trafficking, because it's always amazing when we go, especially to the boys' schools, to sensitize them. They are surprised that the woman possibly be victims. And that is why we are also trying to tap into the more male-dominated industries as well. Because what we've realized when we engage with our girls is that the buyers of sex are not of a particular class, they're not of a particular race, so it's across the board. So we have businessmen, we have persons in sports, we have, unfortunately, law enforcement is a wide group of persons. So we need to really reach out to them to sensitize them and also to educate them on the ills of what they are doing. So it is not just that it's an even exchange where they're paying their money, the girls are providing the services, and everyone is winning. You know, we need to get out there the fact that most of the times these experiences are very traumatic for the girls, all the more so since a lot of these girls are below the age of 18. So even though, you know, sometimes they may look like 21, 22, they are actually 16 and 17-year-olds. And sometimes the men that participate in these things have children that are older than them. So we really need to target that buyer group of persons. So that is where we are actually pushing our focus this year and into the early next year.
And sensitization is one thing, but at the same time, where does legislation come in? Because you're now talking about in terms of like that age, and you have minors. So actual legislation or amendments to legislation. I see you nodding. Talk to me, and we have 1.5 minutes.
Okay, right. So we do have the Trafficking in Persons Act, which is a very strong act. When you compare it to other jurisdictions, our law is very good. So it is not that we don't have the laws in place. We have very stiff penalties for the trafficking of adults, and that fine goes up to $1 million and imprisonment of 20 years in the case of anybody that is trafficked under the age of 18, right? There are some amendments that are coming which would now make offenses hybrid. That way, some matters would be dealt with faster. So, for example, the DPP can decide if a matter is to be tried summarily, meaning before the magistrate's court, or indictably before the High Court. So, obviously, the matters that are tried at the magistrate's court would be disposed of faster. We are also looking at now creating an offense for smuggling, because right now, you know, smuggling is a big thing. Most of our girls who later become victims would have been smuggled into the country. That is brought into the country illegally. So the law will now cover situations like that as well.
And it feels as though this is not something that we can cover in one conversation, but we've had this conversation, and we really want to thank you for your time. Deputy Director of the Counter Trafficking Unit, Kimoy Thomas-Williams, as well as Advocacy and Movement Building Country Manager for Free the Slaves, Adrian Alexander. Thank you for the work you are doing and continue to do. And on behalf of the entire TTT News team, I'm Dike Rostant. This has been In Depth with me. Thank you so much for joining us.